Well, thank you for inviting me to be with you this evening. I understand that you like the Zoom meeting we had some time ago, the fall of Saxon England. Well, this was a little earlier, the beginning really of the Saxon period. Alfred the Great. Why was it called the Great? Well, we'll look at that. But first of all, how many people with the title Great can you tell me? Alexander. Catherine. Frederick. That's one I haven't got, but yes, okay. That's all. Any others? Don't you shout at once? Right, well, you're going to stay behind and do your homework. Let's have a look in order. First of all, Ramesses the Great in Egypt. Then there was Cyrus the Great from the Bible times, Persia. Alexander the Great, perhaps the most famous, Greece. Constantine the Great, Roman. Charlemagne the Great, German. Genghis Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, Mongolia. Stephen the Great. Did you say you've not heard of Stephen? You have. Remember the carol on the feast of Stephen? So you do know him. You do know him. Peter the Great, Russia. Oh, yeah. Catherine the Great, Russia. So where was our Alfred? There he was. Right in the middle. On a list of some truly famous people. For good or bad. So let's have a look together to see why he was called that name. When Alfred was born, England was divided into separate kingdoms. Each of these earldoms or areas had their own king. They were often at war with each other. So they were weak, parochial kingdoms, extending their energies against each other rather than pulling together. The Celts, when the Saxons were ruling, were driven into Strathclyde, Wales, and Cornwall. The rest of Britain was under Saxon control. But it was a fragmented system, weak and just right for alien invasion. There was a man called Ragnar Lothbrok, and he regularly raided the coastline of England. Year after year he came, until eventually the king of Northumbria captured him and cruelly killed him. Now that did not go down too well with Ragnar Lothbrok's family. They vowed revenge. Anybody seen the Viking series on Netflix? One or two of you? Yeah, worth watching. So the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok ordered and got together what came to be called by the Saxons the Great Heathen Army. Because at this time the Saxons were fundamental Christians, but the Danes and Vikings were not. They were pagans. So in response to the death of their father, they invaded. Now, it was not just a hit and run, it was quite a strong invasion. And at this time, Alfred was only 16 years old. So the sons that came, first one was Halfdan Ragnarsson. Then, interestingly, Ivor the Boneless. We still don't really know why it was called that. But according to The Last Kingdom, a series that's been running, he was paralyzed from the waist down, but that's pure conjecture. We don't know. But he was called Ivor the Boneless. Then there was other. So these three sons formed an army that the Saxons themselves called the Great Heathen Army. They attacked not on a raid, but on a plan of invasion, and it lasted for 14 years. So it wasn't just a hit and run, it was a planned campaign of invasion and conquest. Now, this invasion, when it started, came in the north. They started with the area around York, and they took that. Then when they got stronger, they moved south a bit and took the Midlands and the east. Then, as they got stronger, they took the whole of the east. Until there was just the last kingdom of Saxons left. I'm sure you know, that's the kingdom of Wessex. And that was the last of the great Saxon kingdoms to stand against the Vikings. The Vikings controlled the rest of England except Northumbria. What we've got to remember as well, this is not just a war of occupation and invasion, it was also a religious war. Because the Saxons were very strong Christian at this time, but the Danes and Vikings were the pagans. So a religious war it was. I was taught when I was a boy that Christianity came to England by St. Augustine in 597. We now know that was not true. Christianity was in these islands long time before that. In fact, the evidence is quite overwhelming that there was Christian communities in these islands, even in Roman times. For example, in AD 200, Tertullian wrote in Adverse Judaeus that there were congregations of Christians already existing in the Isles of Britain. Then the Christians formed a Celtic church. And the Celtic church was the first church, the first real church on these islands. The Romans didn't get kindly or take kindly to the Christians, and their first recorded martyr on these islands was that of St. Albans, hence the town or city that's named after him. And by right, to my mind, he should be the patron saint of England because he was the first martyr that was made in Roman times, rather than St. George, who was Turkish, you probably know. So he was massacred or martyred in 304, again, a long time before St. Augustine. In 314, 3 bishops were recorded as attending a conference in France, 3 Christian bishops. So again, before St. Augustine. It was around 450 when the Saxons came, and initially they were pagans, but they quickly converted to Christianity, and so we had at that time an Alfred period of religious conflict. Now, the Celtic Church was functioning, and then St. Augustine came along from the Roman Church, and they had meetings and conferences because there were differences between them. And the differences were quite strong. Then in 597, St. Augustine came, and one of the big arguments they had was the date of Easter. They couldn't agree on how to calculate the date of Easter. Well, it's a moon festival, and the moon moves a bit, not as regular as the sun. It was quite a complicated calculation. It was the Roman bishops that won, and so the Celtic had to adopt the Roman decision to adopt the date that we now have for Easter. All this background is the setting, the background setting that Alfred was born into. So it was a time of religious war, of alien invasion, and very unstable kingdom. Very, very difficult period, very unsettled. The Saxons didn't have much success initially against the Vikings, But they did have one at the Battle of Ashdown. This was the first main recorded victory of the Saxons against the Vikings, against the great heathen army. And that was in January 871. It was a victory, but it was a temporary victory. It was not going to last. Alfred actually fought at that battle alongside his brother. And his brother was the king. He was called Ethelred. Now, in Saxon times, there were lots of Ethelred. Most people know of one, Ethelred the Unready, but it's nothing to do with him. He was not around at that time. Ethelred the Unready came much later. This Ethelred was the brother of Alfred, and he fought with him at the Battle of Ashdown. We now surmise that he was wounded, because not long after that, he died. Now, that meant the throne was vacant, and it was not the time to really inherit his throne. Alfred was only 21. Can you imagine taking that responsibility at the age of 21? What we've also got to remember is people didn't live as long as we do in those days. So maybe 21 equates to something like 45 to us. So that's a relative comparison. So, when his brother died, Ethelred, Alfred was not automatically going to be king. This is the family. There have been several brothers. Alfred was the youngest. All of them had been king before Alfred. First of all, let me get the names right. Ethelflaed, then is Ethelbert and Ethelred. And they only reigned 2 years for that one, 5 years for that one, and 8 years for that one. Not long. And if it had been hereditary, the son of Ethelred, who got wounded in the Battle of Ashdown, would have inherited. But the Saxons didn't do that. They didn't have hereditary succession. That came in with the Normans. The Saxons didn't have that at all. Most, if not all, of the Saxon kings were elected by a body called the Witan. And so it wasn't the son of Ethelred that inherited, it was Ethelred's brother, Alfred. Now, that might not have gone down too well with the son of Ethelred, but that's what happened. So the Witan were a form of parliament. It was the embryo of the parliament. It was made up of thanes, that's the Saxon word for lords, earls, generals, and bishops. And they had the power to elect a king. So we had in Saxon England the early form of a democracy. Not everyone knows that. It was the Normans that insisted on father to son. It would be another many hundred years before such a body could influence the kings of England. Probably 400 or 500 years, or 800 years, before they could influence the kings. So the Witan was quite powerful, and they elected Alfred to become king. 21 years old. Now, Alfred was not in good health. People have analysed his symptoms, and they've come to the conclusion that he had Crohn's disease, which is a blockage of the intestines, because he could only eat porridge and he was never very strong, although he was regularly in battles, but never mind, he was quite a brave person. Now then, Alfred was forced to buy off the invasion, buy off the Vikings. Now, we know that's never a good idea, to pay a blackmailer, but sometimes, and this is one of them, he had no choice. By doing this, he bought himself some time, because he got a very weak, unstable kingdom. He was only young, and he needed stability. The only way to get that is to buy off the Vikings. And he paid a Dane to pay them to stop fighting, which they did. And that lasted for a few years. But then the Vikings didn't keep to their word. And a few years later, in fact 7 years later, they attacked again. Now, one of the interesting things about the Vikings, they attacked on Christian holy days because they knew that the Saxons would be in the churches on those holy days. And so there they all were in the church, a good time to attack. And that's what they did. The 6th of January was the 12th day of Christmas. And in that time, right up till early medieval time, the 12th night or 12th day of Christmas was as big a celebration as Christmas Day. It was the Industrial Revolution that took place of that. But in those days, it was 12 days of Christmas. We still sing that, don't we? And so the Vikings knew that on the 12th day, they'd be in the churches. And that's when they attacked. This time, the leader was Guthrum. And Guthrum had come across with the great Eastern army. So now, they had the whole, or virtually the whole of England, because it was Northumbria, it was not. Now we've got a what if situation now. What if? What if this had stayed that way? Well, we wouldn't be speaking English. We would be speaking perhaps Danish, Norwegian, or Germanic form of language. I know English is Germanic, they're not the same as German. We certainly wouldn't be speaking the language we know today. And there wouldn't be an England. It would still be a fragmented, separate, well, it would have been for a long time, separated little kingdom, waiting for someone to conquer. So that is a what if moment. What if that is as it stayed? But it wasn't going to stay like that for long. Because although Alfred was defeated and hopeless, he was a fighter, a real tough fighter. He was forced to flee with his family into the marshes of Somerset. Can you imagine the mosquitoes there and the difficulties? And in that area, there was an old Iron Age fort. And the old Iron Age fort, they reinforced and held it for quite a while they carried out guerrilla warfare. Hit and run. That's all they could do. Hit and run. The story of Alfred burning the cake has often been thought to be fictional, but I can assure you it was real. It did happen. He got all these things on his mind. He'd lost his kingdom. He was hiding in the marshes, wondering what on earth he was going to do. And he was asked to look after some cake. I think he would have all the things on his mind. How do we know it was real? Well, the man who wrote his biography, Bishop Acker, recorded that happening. So the cake were burnt. It wasn't fiction. Now, carrying out guerrilla warfare was hit and run, and he did this gradually getting more and more men to help him. Till after a while, he got 3,000 men helping him, getting stronger all the time. In the old days of the Saxon warfare and the Vikings, they were not good strategies. It was a case of a melee, a charge, and the last man standing is the winner. It was not planned. Now, Alfred was educated. He'd gone to Rome as a boy. In fact, he'd gone to Rome twice. And he was educated about Roman tactics. And he brought those ideas back with him and started training the Saxons with some of the old Roman tactics. One of that was the shield wall. Now, the shield wall was formidable. Right up until the Battle of Hastings, the Saxons used this. We're not sure how they formed it. Maybe it was like that. That's formidable, isn't it? Or like that. But can you imagine the pattern, something like that? Or it could have been like that. That whatever it was, the shield wall was used to this environment. And it was very powerful and very successful. So by doing this, he then started to get the upper hand. And he was ready then to take on the Vikings in a full-scale battle. Interestingly, at that time, very few archers were used. Archers were looked down on. The real men would be in the shield wall, at the front. The real tough guys, they'd be at the front. But if you're not quite up to it, well, you could hide behind them with your little bow and arrow. And so the archers were not considered full soldiers. So if you think later medieval history, the archers went to the prominent. But at this time, no, they were not the full soldiers. The Battle of Eddington in 878 was when things began to turn and change. He used the shield wall to full extent. Now, we don't know exactly how it was, but it was something like that. Quite formidable force. And the Vikings had not come across this before, because prior to that, it was very much hit and run. Guthrum had come with a great heathen army, and he was the leader at that time. It lasted all day, the battle. It was feared that the Vikings would be defeated and driven back to a place called Chippenham, where the Saxons surrounded them and kept them there with no food and water for 14 days. So now they were starving and wanted peace.